Hello and welcome to episode 176 of Page 1, the Writers' Podcast. I'm Marco and I'm flying solo today for this intro, but don't worry, Tarek is in the main bit of the podcast, the interview. Thanks for joining us on the podcast where we like to speak to writers of all kinds about their writing careers and find out how they got into the industry. This week's episode is a very special episode. It was recorded live at Cymera Festival in July. With the brilliant RJ Barker in front of an audience that included, as you'll hear RJ say, some other brilliant writers such as Shauna Lawless, Tendai Huchu, C.K. McDonnell and more were in the audience, so that was brilliant as well. Because it's a live recording, and we were in a very echoey room, the audio quality isn't quite up to our usual standards, but I have done my best to tidy it up, and it's a brilliant interview with RJ, who was just a fantastic guest and really great fun. So I hope you enjoy the interview. We'll get straight into it after a quick advert for our writer's notebook, and then I'll be back very briefly at the end of the podcast just to let you know about next week's guest. The blank page. To some, it's terrifying, an obstacle to overcome. But we prefer to think of it as an opportunity, a blank canvas to be filled with all of the adventures and characters in our head. So how to overcome that fear? Well, we all know the best advice for a writer is write. Seriously, get words on the page and more will follow.
But what about later, when you start trying to pull those threads of what you've written together? What about the character you wrote about way back at the start? Who was she again? What was she carrying? And where did she leave the MacGuffin that she now really needs in the third act? Think about all those top thrillers you like to read, or that amazing drama you just watched. What did they all have in common? Structure and planning.
As aspiring writers ourselves, we've tried many different methods to try and organise all the thoughts about the stories we want to tell. We've been there searching for a piece of scrap paper to note something down, or making a quick note on our phone in between meetings.
Or sometimes we'll make a note in whatever notebook we're carrying, or a document on our laptop so we don't forget that great idea. Let's be honest, it can all be a bit messy and it's easy to lose track of everything. And that's when we realised it's not just the story that needs structure and planning, but the way we gather all of our thoughts about it as well.
And so we made Page 1. Page 1 is more than just another notebook. It's a place to put down all your ideas for your latest project, divided into easy-to-use sections that will help you plan your story, so that when that blank page comes calling, you're ready to answer. And then afterwards, once it's written, we realised you need to plan how to let people read it, so we included a section relating to submissions.
Each one is designed for one project, whether you want to write a book, screenplay, a comic, or any other kind of story. We truly believe that when you use it, it will help you get to the main event, writing your story. So we hope this helps.
We can't wait to read what you come up with.
And remember, every story starts with Page 1.
Well, thanks everyone for coming along to what is only the second ever live episode that we've done. So if it all goes wrong, it's entirely our fault. We have a great relationship with the Cymera Festival, so it's really brilliant to be able to have this opportunity to do that. We are also, I know if you listen to the podcast, you'll be sick of hearing about notebooks, but we are in the Creators Hall, and you can come and buy one of the notebooks at a very special discounted price. So if you want to head, as is being demonstrated here, there you go. Excellent modelling. But today, you've not come for us, you've come for our guest, the amazing RJ Barker, critically acclaimed and award-winning author of fantasy fiction, including the Wounded Kingdom trilogy and the award-winning Tide Child Trilogy. It's hard to say that. His new book, Gods of the Wyrdwood, is out this month. So thanks very much for joining us, RJ.
Oh, yeah, I'm glad. That sounds like my agent's bio for me, which sounds really impressive. And then I send out mine, and RJ Barker writes books.
So, on these podcasts, I always start with the same question, which is, did you always want to be a writer? Because I know that you had perhaps other ambitions.
Yeah, no, I didn't want to be a writer. I wanted to be a rock star. And I was quite convinced and sure I was going to be a rock star. So I kind of stopped going to school, which my parents pointed out was a bad idea. And many, many years later, I tended to agree with them. but I had a very good time and was only held back by my complete inability to play a musical instrument. I was the worst bass player in Leeds for about a decade, but I had really good hair, and that gets you a long way, but never to anywhere near success. And eventually I was in a band with a friend of mine who's really talented, and when you get near proper, really talented people, you realise that, yeah, I can't keep up. And I said, I'm sorry, I have to go, I can't keep up. And bless him, he said, a week later he came, it's not the same without you. You're the heart of the band, aren't you? We need you, come back. And I came back, and about halfway through the rehearsal, he went, yeah, you know you said you couldn't keep up. Actually, you had a point. So I kind of went away, and I thought, well, I know I want to be creative, and I don't want to work in a call centre because it's killing me. What can I do? And everyone, I was always the one with a book in my pocket, and I'd scribbled stuff before, and I like poetry, I used to write poetry and lyrics and stuff, and I thought, right, I'm going to be a novelist, and I'm going to get signed to one of the big publishers and release a book. And everybody just laughed at me and went, what did you get in English at school, RJ? And I was like, let's not talk about that. Let's just write books. So I wrote books for 13, 14 years, and managed to take all the worst advice, I think, that I found and stop and then start again. And eventually I sold a book to Orbit, to my agent.
What was the worst piece of advice that you listened to?
I think the worst piece of advice was somebody told me I was using grammar incorrectly, and I should buy Strunk and White's Elements of Style, which I did, and then I tried to write properly, and I can't. I don't write like I write like I write, and I found that I did actually understand the rules. Enough of it had stuck because I read a lot, and I was just willfully enjoying ignoring them, and that's where a lot of the joy came from. And basically, that any advice I got that sucked the joy out of it for me was advice. I made this guy, and eventually, Chas Brenchley. Do you know Chas Brenchley? No. He wrote some books called Dead of Light, which are wonderful. It came out in the 90s, and I followed him on some sort of early social media thing, and he said, "The best rule of writing is what works for you is what works." And it was just like, yeah, I'm free. I'm going to write whatever I fancy now. And I did. And some of it was awful. A lot of it was awful.
And was it all fantasy? Was that what you wanted to write, or did you try different genres before you kind of settled in?
Fantasy was kind of an accident. Probably if you'd asked me what I'd get published in, I would have said science fiction or crime. Okay. I read a load of fantasy quite early on, and a big influence is C.J. Cherryh. Whose work I love. The Morgaine books are astounding. And I read all like the fantasy classics and sort of Robert Jordan and all of that when it was coming out. But by the time I'd started seriously writing, I was much more interested in science fiction, like Ian Banks and in American contemporary crime, which I love. And we submitted with my previous agent a big science fiction novel that everybody turned down. But they were quite complimentary about it. And then that agent started to downsize his thing, and he went, I'm downsizing my operation. I was going, oh, right. And sadly for you, I was like, oh no, that's not as good as I thought. And he sort of I gave him a list of people I was going to sub this new book to, which he'd read. And he said, I think this book's all right, actually, it might have something. And I thought it was a crime novel because Age of Assassins is primarily an Agatha Christie style murder mystery in a fantasy world, with a lot of stabbing as well. And magic, and I gave him this list of agents, and he just said, "Oh, you should also try Ed Wilson." And I'd seen him on Twitter, and his Twitter handle is literary whore, which just scared the life out of me, because I'm not a literary writer. I bounce so hard off Wolf Hall. I can't. And he said, "No, you should try Ed Wilson. You'll get in touch. You'll get on with him." So I tried Ed, and he came back in like 3 days and said, "Yeah, there's something here. I quite like this," and took me on and sold the novel really quickly. And it's been gravy since then, as we like to say.
And that first trilogy of books came out very, very quickly for a trilogy, It was in the course of, 18 months or so. But did you sell all 3 books at the same time then? Had you written all 3 books at that point?
No, I wrote the first one in 6 weeks because I'd been waiting for this science fiction novel to come back, and I don't know. You're quite processy, aren't you? So people probably know that you send out your book and all the editors look at it and decide how long they'll take to turn you down. And that process, I'd never been through it before, and I found it really, I couldn't write. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know whether I should be writing another book like that or what. It was really weird. So I kind of felt like I was stuck. So then when I got turned down, rather than being, oh, poor me, I was like, yes, I can write again. And I wrote this book in like 6 weeks. And it was just meant as a standalone, just a fantasy murder mystery. And I said, right, we need a trilogy. Let's write a trilogy. So I sketched out 2 more books. And Orbit said, can you write one every 6 months? And I went, yeah, of course I can, because I did not know any better. And I did. I can write quite quickly, because I have a superpower, which is being chronically ill, which means I don't have to have a job. And at the time I was on incapacity benefit, or whatever they call it now. So I was at home all the time, which is very useful for writing, and a lot of writers don't have that luxury, which I do, which allows people say you write quickly, and I don't. I just don't have much else to do during the day.
And then, I mean, when you had, you kind of had this one book, and they say, can you do make it 3, and you kind of sketch this idea. Had you left like a setup? Did you know where you were going to go with it? How long did it take you to sketch this idea out? Did you plan it properly or what? No,
I don't plan anything. Not just books. I literally just blunder through life, hoping everything will turn out all right. I wrote. You have to sort of submit little like back of the book blurbs for what you think. But I don't think the books I wrote had much to do with those in the end. And by the time you get to the 3rd book, I find, because I'm very exploratory as a writer, I find by the time you get to a 3rd book, I hate saying taken on a life of its own, because that implies I'm not in control of it. But there is a momentum to it at that point, and the story is kind of creating itself. And my subconscious knows a lot more about what's going on. Can I spoil books for people on your podcast?
Absolutely.
Yeah. In King of Assassins, the third book, you kind of establish there's a lot of people that they hunt people who can do magic, which the main character can. And I wrote a sentence that they go to where they're based, and underneath it is when people use magic, the reason they don't like it is I was thinking about oil and stuff like that. It sucks the life out of the world. So there are these places where nothing will grow, and they call it a souring. And there's one of these underneath the castle of the sorcerer hunters, which means somebody there is using huge amounts of magic. And I wrote just that in a sentence. And as soon as I read it, I just thought, I've broken my book. I've broken every rule I've set up in this entire trilogy. And there's a little sensible voice going, well, delete it. And then the other part of me going, no, never go backwards, never. Just go with it and see what happens. And it ended up being the linchpin for the entire book. But I literally had nothing planned apart from the final act of the character arc between the main 2 characters. But the actual plot of the book, absolute mystery until I get there.
And you said that you don't plan anything out, but do you what is your process day by day? Are you have a word target? Do you have certain hours you write between or anything like that?
I've kind of settled in that I write Monday to Friday, and I usually write in the mornings, because, well, sometimes I write all day, but I started playing Skyrim again, that ruined that. So I usually write in the mornings, and depending on what I'm writing, like with Wyrdwood, and its next 2 books, I'm like 60k into the 3rd one now. They're quite heavy going, and I aim for about 1,000 words a day. And maybe more, it just depends how it feels right to finish. But I tell myself 1,000 words is my minimum. But if I don't hit that, I'm just like, who cares? And I reset it the next day. I don't sort of say, right, I owe myself 300 words, because I think that's just very limiting, and it doesn't help you. It makes you just feel guilty. And I'm not into guilt. I'm just into enjoying stuff. So that's what I aim at. But sometimes with other stuff, like I finished the first Wyrdwood book, and then I always want to write the book I'm not meant to be writing. Really, that's what I want to be doing. So I had an idea after I finished the first Wyrdwood book, and I went away and I wrote that book in like 4 weeks, because it was really clear. And that book I did 7,000 or 8,000 words a day, because it just, it was just there, and it was for me. It's not, I don't have to do it, and that's really freeing. And then go back to the other book, which is like the serious.
So I mean, it sounds to me like a lot of what we've talked to, they like having that kind of deadline of, you've got like a month left, you've got to get it finished, and that helps them focus and to write down. But it almost sounds like you're the opposite then. When you're freed from what you're meant to be writing, you can write for yourself, then that's when you write way more and you focus more. Is that right?
Yeah, and I don't really pay any attention. I never know what my deadlines are, ever. I just don't. I just say, I'll try and get it to you by then, and we'll see. Because publishing is actually quite. These are probably secrets I'm not meant to tell anyone.
No, we love the secrets. Tell everybody. It's just
everybody in here, you're sworn to secrets. Okay. Because you hand in, it's not like, all right, your deadline is the end of this week, and then you hand in your book, and then the week after your editor comes back to you and says, right, I've read the book. Yeah. You hand in the book, and then maybe 3 months later, your editor comes back to you, or 4 months later, depending on their workload, because everybody on that side of publishing is massively overworked. It's mental. You get letters from your editor and they've written them at 1 a.m. It's mad. So deadlines, if I miss my deadline, I'm actually helping my editor because I'm taking her work.
It's a considerate way to think about it.
Yeah. So I'm not fussed about deadlines, and it's the creation of art. You can only do it at the speed you can do it, and sort of coming along and going, you must finish this book doesn't help. It hinders you. So I'm quite relaxed about that. But 1,000 words a day, that's kind of doable. And if I'm in I don't want to do this mood, which usually occurs right in the middle of a book. Right in the middle of the book, that's just like, no, I hate this, it's terrible. I'm terrible, books are terrible. Apart from this other one I want to write, that's really good. I'm like, right, you write 1,000 words, RJ, and then you can play Skyrim, which you bought a PlayStation 5 to play Skyrim, which was for a game like 10 years ago. But play something up to date.
I've bought it 5 times on different platforms.
Yeah.
I think you've only not bought the VR version.
No, I haven't.
Oh, you have the VR version. Yeah. Okay, sorry.
Oh, is it good? Don't say no. It's not.
No, rubbish. Absolutely rubbish. Yeah.
So I reward myself, but usually what I find is by the time I get to about 700 words, actually I'm quite into it, and I've hit something. Then I'm going. Yeah. So I can, and there's a momentum and flow of ideas to writing that the more you write a thing, the easier it becomes to write. So I think that's where write every day comes, which is awful advice and not physically possible for a lot of people, but I think that's where it comes from, that momentum.
Yeah. And with that, so I'm going back to what you were saying about getting to the end of a trilogy and subconsciously you know a lot more. Obviously fantasy books are very heavy on the world building. There's a huge cast of characters and everything. I mean, are you just storing all of that in your head, or do you have it written down, to keep track of what did this character do in book 1 and all of that sort of thing?
I don't have what this character did in book 1 written down anywhere apart from in my head. I keep the plot of the entire trilogy in my head. Mm-hmm. When I wrote the Assassins book, there's a sort of fighting system that's based on dances, and they number every single one of them. They have like the first thing, second thing, and I did find out that I should definitely have written those down when I started the second book. And then the World of the Bone Ships. I call it the Bone Ships. I never call it the Tide. It's too hard to say. The Bone Ships books. They're obviously quite because I love big tall ships. And if you know anything about big tall ships, they're really, really complicated. And I knew I was never going to learn enough. People have gone, oh, you're world building. You went to all this thing. You went to all this. Look how much time you spent on this. And I'm like, no. I made stuff up, so I didn't learn how to do it properly. That's what I did. But I thought of all this new terminology that was sort of world specific. And of course, because I'd learned from the Assassin books that I should be writing these things down and keeping a track of them, I didn't. I completely ignored that. So by the time I got to the second book, I had to go back and read the first one again and write everything down. This time I've learned a bit more, and I have sort of kept a book for it. Yeah. But it's very incomplete and not alphabetically ordered, which is stupid.
And what about when you're actually writing your draft? Because you say you don't plan stuff, but do you have like parts, like kind of milestones you want to hit, or tent poles that are, I want to get to this bit, and then, this would be cool if this happens here, so I'll work my way to that next kind of milestone. Do you have these kind of bits you want to hit? Or
yeah. It's quite free, but as I'm writing, I'll be like, I think this thing should happen. Mm-hmm. So now I need to work out how to make these characters get to that thing. And so I'm writing towards a thing that I know. that I want to write. And God, this would be quite exciting to write that bit. And quite often it's not what people think, oh, it's an action sequence, isn't it? It's going, no, it's two people talking about horses or something. Not horses. Yeah, there's no horses in my world, but horse analogues. There's two people talking about it. It's because I like conversation. So I tend to be writing, as you write, all these things build up in the back of your head and the plot is carrying on. And there's a lovely, because for me, there's a terrifying moment when you start the first book and you're looking at a blank page and you think, I fucking no idea what this is about. I don't know how it ends. I don't know who any of these people, where are they going? How can I get out of the situation I left the second book in, which felt clever at the time, but was obviously stupid. And then sort of euphoria right at the end where you're thinking, yeah, I tied it all up. Yeah, I planned this all along. And because there's loads of happy accidents, you'll be like, oh God, if only there was a talking dog. If only I'd written in a talking dog. And then you look back, oh, actually, I did write in a talking dog. I just forgot I didn't call it a dog. So that tends to be, there's a really good writer in my subconscious that's desperately trying to help me while I ruin everything and just, I gotta write this. So there's like something keeping track in the back of my head that I'm quite thankful for. But I think that's like 14 years of learning to write in the most stupidly difficult way possible, which I wouldn't suggest anybody does. I would suggest you go on courses and learn how to do it properly. It's probably a lot quicker and easier.
But speaking of talking animals, I guess the standout, or one of the standout characters in the Bone Ships trilogy, as I'll call it now, is I'm going to pronounce this wrong, the Galeem.
That's right, that's how I do it. But I do say that however the reader pronounces it is right.
Okay.
It's whatever you fancy.
So, and I read, did that character, the idea of the Galeem come about because a friend misheard what you were actually thinking about doing?
Yeah. I'd written this world, and the idea was that there were no mammals in it. But when my son, who was 12, turned around to me and went, "What about the people?" I was like, "Shut up, go and live in the shed, you awful child." We're not talking about that. But I have a friend called Matt, and the third book's dedicated to him. And we go and play badminton, if I'm up to badminton. And if not, we go and sit in cafes and drink coffee like we're important French artists. And I wear a beret. I brought it with me. I didn't wear it today, it's too hot. I'm not sure he's a fan. But anyway, we do this, and he's very kind because he lets me talk my books at him, and he almost pays attention. And I was telling him about this world where there's no animals, but birds. It's all birds. And there were these wizards, and they could control the wind. And as we were walking back, he went, "I love the idea of the bird wizards." And I was like, "That's not what I said. I said wizards and birds." And by the time I'd got home, I'd had this amazing idea for these bird wizards. And next time I saw Matt, I said, "I just had this brilliant idea for these bird wizards." And he went, "Yeah, I really like that." I thought you would, yeah. So it's kind of one of those happy accidents that I like to tell myself I'd have got to anyway, but probably wouldn't. Because writing's not quite as lonely as people say. It's nice to have sounding boards.
When you're, I think one of the things I often find so impressive about fantasy novels is the world, is the building of the world and the author's skill in knowing how much to put on the page and how much to leave off. And it's very easy, I think, to spend 10, 20 pages talking about how a place looks or the make of the land, etc. But how do you know when to drop in bits of the lore and the world and keep the story moving at a good pace?
In my head, when I'm being pretentious, I like to think of it as method writing. In that you're writing, Ed MacDonald was saying a similar thing in the thing I was doing earlier on. You're writing through the eyes of the character, so you only know what they know. And you might have, I personally haven't because I'm incredibly lazy, but you might have written like a 20-page history of the mountains in the distance and everything that lives in them and all of those. But that character just knows the mountains. Mm-hmm. And that's all you need to put because the reader is living in their head. I'm very careful not to try writing as an omniscient narrator because then it's easy to go a bit mental. Wyrdwood is properly no prisoners at all. You have to pay attention and you have to work it out. There's no clues. I don't think there's a glossary. If there's a glossary, I didn't put it there. Because I like that. I like that process of discovering something new.
Yeah, being dropped in.
Yeah. So yeah, as little as possible, as little as I think I can get away with. And if my editor's not confused by it, then I've got away with it. But I always think world building is a thing we kind of put more stress on than is actually needed. Because I don't really do very much. I'll have like 2 or 3 things that I start off with, and then from then on it's writing it to find out what the world's like. And I think it's much more important that your characters live in that world, and it can be as ridiculous as you want. Trees can grow ears, it doesn't matter. As long as to them that's normal and real, then your world is convincing. And it sort of meshes together and finds itself as you go along, for me. But anything world building, research, saying this in sorry if you're at the panel earlier on because I'm just repeating myself now. But world building, research, even planning your novel, all those things are just finding that moment where you have enough confidence to sit in front of your computer and go, right, I can write this now, and that's it. And because I, as I said, chose the most difficult path possible, I can go and sit at my computer straight away and just think, well, if I make it up, it will happen, and that's fine. But it's finding your sort of space in there of how much you need to do.
So, I mean, you mentioned the new book, Gods of the Wyrdwood. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what that is about?
Yeah. Oh God, I struggle with this because there's so much hidden from the reader in the first book that
Yeah.
I kind of like.
You don't want to spoil it.
Yeah. I'm going to give away the plot of the next 2 if I do this. It's set in a world where one side of it is always winter, one side is always summer. And there's like a priestly caste of people who can use magic called the Rye, who are deeply unpleasant because I hate people in power, and I'm very against it. So they're nasty and they're bad. And every so often somebody called, there's hundreds of gods, hundreds of little forest gods everywhere, and little sects and little monasteries that are worshipping their one. And every so often one will come across the chosen one, as fantasy loves a chosen one. We love it. And our main character, Kahan, he's the chosen one. And he's taken from he's a farm boy and everything. He's taken from his farm as a child and taken to the monastery and put through this deeply unpleasant process to become the Cowal Rye, who he's meant to tilt the world back. So the north, which was cold, becomes warm, and the south, which was hot, becomes cold. Obviously, the people of the south hate the people of the north, and the people of the north hate the people of the south because they're stuck in this ridiculous, endless cycle. But what happens to Kahan is, before he gets to come into his power, somebody else does it. And he's not needed anymore. And he was kind of raised to become a monster, and he doesn't want to be. And so we actually join him, and he's in his mid-30s, and he's a hermit being a farmer. But he's not that. And maybe he needs more, and maybe there is a purpose in this world to him that he really does not want to step up to. And it's a book about not being able to move forward and not being able to accept that you need to kind of confront things to move forward. And it keeps pulling itself back. It's kind of really... I keep describing it as fantasy books are often a group of people go somewhere. This is one man goes nowhere. But it's not the best description. It's not like drugging in the readers, but that's kind of what I'm trying to do. He's frustrating, deeply frustrating for the reader, which I'm sure they're going to love. People love that.
That's such a good setup for a story, because it's taking that kind of classic hero's journey and just making one, in some ways at first, and that one moment kind of upends the whole, what people think the story might go or what type of story it might be. It's a very neat way of doing that.
Yeah, it's often just one thing. And the other, when it comes to world building, the other thing is they don't have metal in this world. So everything relies on wood, so it's slightly different. And they don't have wheels, which is quite fun.
Does that not give you lots of logistical difficulties when you're...
No, because there are these massive forests, and this might be a little bit... I don't care. So let's spoil it. There's 2 ecologies. I think you pick it up from the first book. There's 2 separate ecologies running, and as part of one of them, there are weeds that float, like bladderwrack, seaweed, but they're filled with a lighter than air gas. And what they do is they wrap their carts and stuff in it, so things float. So it's much easier. So they don't need roads, and they don't need wheels. So it just changes entirely how a society works, which is quite fun.
And it is the first book in a planned trilogy. What is it with fantasy and trilogies? Why do fantasy stories have to be told in these multi-book epics?
I have no idea. I mean, there's a lot of people doing standalone at the moment, and they seem to be quite popular. But trilogy seems to be the thing that I must write. That's why I do it, because that's what my publisher says. Can you do a trilogy? Yes, of course I can. But also, if you want to do quite a complex world, it allows you, because a trilogy is just one really long book, and it allows you to build it all in the first book, and then. I mean, I'm really bad because I imagine my editor is thinking, can you just make it go a bit faster? And I'm like, no, that's not what I do. no, I'm for slowly enveloping the reader in this absolutely horrible place that they probably wouldn't want to be in any other way apart from reading it. So you get that, and then in the second book you get to move everything forward and you get to expand your world, and then in the third book you can bring it all back together. I'm never going to write more than 3 though,
right?
Because I'm bored by the end of the third book.
I was going to ask you that. You know, what do you find more exciting? Is it the getting to that final end of the third book and pulling everything in one place, or are you already thinking, I've got a new exciting idea, I want to get into something else? I'm
desperate to start something new by the time I'm about halfway through the third book. I'm done with this, because I don't like rules at all. I don't like being told what to do, even when it's me. And by that point, I've built in all these rules to my world that I have to obey. So I'm kind of hemmed in at that point. I'm like, oh, the freedom's gone. But the thing about writing something new is I always want to do something completely different. And that as an author is terrifying, because readers want you to do the thing you did before. So,
and I imagine the marketers and the publishers want you to do the same thing, so they can, you know, where to put you on the shelf and how to sell you, etc.
Yeah, I mean, my editor Jenny Hill at Orbit's really good, because she just goes, do what you want to do. But I always kind of feel that maybe they're a bit bemused by my books. We put them out, people buy them. Okay, just let him do it. Just let him carry on. That's fine. But yeah, it's terrifying as a writer, because you know that there's a large amount of people who will have loved the Bone Ships and will pick up the new one and go, this is not the Bone Ships, and it's not what I want. I want more of that thing. Yeah. And it happened with the Bone Ships, because a lot of people read the Assassin books and they picked up on, well, this is not the Assassin books, and I want that thing. And a certain amount will come around, but there'll always be a certain amount who just go, no, not for me.
I suppose you're also able to maybe tap into new audiences every time.
Yeah.
Is it, you're not just the same pool of people every time you write a new book?
Fingers crossed.
And fantasy generally, along with other genres like sci-fi and stuff, there seems to be a bit less snobbery from publishing world towards genre writing. I mean, why do you think that is these days?
Oh God, I'm very careful what I say now. I think when I was reading fantasy, a lot of the fantasy I read at the time was, I'm not used to having to think about the words I say. I just say them. You can edit this out later on. Felt very much aimed at teenage boys. And I think there still is some fantasy that is kind of aimed at teenage boys, who may not necessarily be teenagers. Some of us do not grow out until we're 30. Not me, obviously. I'm very intelligent. Possibly, I do. And I think that is still how it's seen. And people don't see that there are a lot of female authors working, doing really interesting things, and a lot of authors doing really interesting things. They see those big books, and that's a perception of them. Not necessarily the right perception, but and I think that's why you get that sort of snobbishness. It's a literary festival in Leeds, they never invite me. Never invite me. I said, I won an award. Oh, did you? That's nice. But
as well, yeah, people have these set ideas about what genre fiction is, and actually in fantasy you've got, there's a lot of cross-genre type, like your Assassin's books are murder mysteries, except in a fantasy setting kind of thing. And, do you think people are slowly starting to discover that it isn't just all Lord of the Rings, essentially.
Yeah, and there's phenomenal writers working in it. There's at least 3 in this room that I can see who I know are really good and just doing interesting things with it. And the thing about fantasy is fantasy and even modern science fiction doesn't have any rules. You can do anything. Just so it's fantasy. You know, you've got Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, which is an astounding bit. I love that book so much. And that's fantasy. And then you've got like The Wheel of Time, which is like easy to read. You've got Brandon Sanderson, who's people love, I don't get. And that's fine. And it's all out there. But it's a broad church. And a really interesting one where people are constantly innovating and finding new things to invent things. And you're getting new points of view from writers who are not middle-aged white men like me, which is fantastic. And every new thing you bring into it should just be celebrated. And this is not my experience; it's something new, and that's as a reader, that's what I'm always looking for. I'm looking for the thing that I've not read before, which fantasy does quite well. Yeah. And also, it doesn't. Some of it is like, yes, you've read this before, and here's more of it, and that's fine. It's comfort. It's fine too.
I mean, it is as you say. It's a broad church, and there's this kind of there's loads. If you don't like one person, you'll like someone else, and there's all this kind of variety. But for a while, it felt like, and I don't know if it's still the case now, but it felt like everything was very kind of dark and gritty, and it was maybe the height of Game of Thrones, and it felt like every fantasy had to be full of violence and sex, and it was very adult-y, kind of aimed. Are we moving away from that now? Are we embracing the more kind of, there is more type of fantasy than just a Game of Thrones type of fantasy?
I hope so, but mostly I read American crime. So, but yes, I think that's it's kind of still going. I mean, Wyrdwood's very dark, but I don't write a lot of sex in my books because there's enough violence in already. And so I'm sticking with the violence part of it. And I'm always a bit funny writing about sex because just if you write sex and you write something and people are thinking that's really weird, so we know what you're into, don't we? Yeah. So I don't know why people. I don't think people think I murder people with swords. I don't know why that is. But there's lots of interesting things because there's a whole fairy tale retelling thing happening, which is a thing on its own. It's really who's marketing what is what you see. Yeah. But I mean, I only read the first 3 Game of Thrones books because I got upset with people dying. I liked him. I didn't want him to die.
And you've said that you're a big crime fan. I mean, would you want to write just a straight crime novel?
I might have done. I've written some under a different name, and my agent has got one at the moment. Because I like to write, and I don't see genre as anything but the clothes story wears. Mm-hmm. So there's a set of rules that you can write within that make something fantasy, or they make it science fiction, or they make it crime. But all those things cross over. Mm-hmm. And I wrote, when I said about writing books in like 3 or 4 weeks, I wrote the first Wyrdwood book, needed a break, so I've written like a fantasy detective story in between. That I wrote in like a few weeks. Did I say 4?
You said 4.
Let's stick with 4. And so I'm just drawn in different. I'm always after novelty, and I think that's what it is. Mm. So yes, yeah, I'd love to write a crime novel.
What sort of crime do you like to read?
I like American crime. I think Sebastian Castell was saying about it, that British crime, we have like a middle-aged, middle-class white detective who comes and thinks about things. And then American crime, they just shoot stuff. And I quite like that. And my other alter ego, RJ Dark, that's kind of, I've written some Mal and Jackie books, which are about 2 working class lads on the council estate who continually get themselves into trouble. And that's sort of the American model of shit, what should we do? Let's beat someone up. And then the fantasy crime one is probably more towards the middle class detective except he's not. He's working class, because up the working class, etc.
And so how much of the Forsaken trilogy is written, or are you still writing that?
I'm 60,000 words into the third one, which is probably...
So you're now bored of it at that point? Yeah,
Yes, I am. That's why I stopped to write a different book for a bit.
So how far through Skyrim are you? Is that the bit?
I finished the main quest.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I'm about to go to Solstheim.
Oh,
so, yeah. So that's that. I've done the Dawnguard. So I'm 6,000 words into the thing, and I know where I'm going now. Kind of, it's quite clear in my head where I'm off. So hopefully I'll go back. I've taken a week off writing because it was half term, and I thought I should spend some time with my son. So I did, and he finished the new Zelda, and I played Skyrim in the same room, but we didn't talk to each other.
Quality parenting.
Yeah, quality parenting. So I didn't write for a week, and I think that's the first week I've not written probably since I signed my first book deal, and it was quite fun. I'm not going to do it again. My agent once told me he said, stop writing, take a holiday, and I found like after 3 days, I was emailing him every day to ask him stuff, and he said, start writing again.
How do you find, because writing's quite solitary, you're quite like in your own head, it's you and your own problems with the book, and do you quite like that, or do you quite like being able to bounce ideas off people and ask questions?
I like bouncing ideas off people, that's fun. But I am quite I like my own company, and I always had done, so that's quite useful. I can just sit, and once I'm in a book, I'm lost. I'm in the book, I'm not seeing the world around me anymore. This horrifies people. I put television on, and that's how I watch like Marvel series and stuff that I feel I should keep up on. I put them on as I'm writing, yeah. Yeah, you're doing that face.
I can't just don't understand.
Yeah.
Surely, how one of them had to suffer. Do you follow the TV and write the book, or... That's quite impressive.
Yeah. Do Marvel characters sometimes make it into your books?
No, but I find that works for me. I don't know why. Or music, but it has to have lyrics. I can't do just music. It has. I think it's because when I first started writing Cymera, when I meant it, my little boy was a baby, and my wife's quite sensible. She just went, I'm having none of this. I'm going to go out and work. You can raise the child because it's smelly. You do that. So I was like stay-at-home dad. So it was constant interruption while I was writing, because you can't just leave a baby in a drawer.
It turns out.
Yeah, no. People get very upset if you do. And I think that's become my process now, that I need constant interruption. So I'll write a bit, and then I'll be like, oh, that's what he's doing. Okay, and then I'll be back to writing, or it'll be music, and I'll think, I like this song. So I'll listen to that, and then I'll go back to writing again. So I dip in and out. Yeah. And then at some point you just kind of hit it, and it's all gone, and then I'm in it and I'm writing.
So you're 60,000 words into the last book of Forsaken. Are you already know what the next fantasy trilogy is going to be? Or?
Yeah. I've got the fantasy detective thing. That's a book that's written, but I don't. That's with my agent, and he can decide what we do with that. And then I've had this idea for ages about walking cities and how that works in my head, and I kind of think I'll do that next for my next big fantasy. I want to write something where people don't hit each other with swords. I've done 9 books of people hitting each other with swords now, and I'm done with that. I'll come back to it, no doubt, because as soon as you're not doing a thing, that's the thing you want to do. Yeah. But I want to write something a bit odder. Yeah. I can hear my editor screaming from here, and my agent just going, no, do this thing.
Just give the people what they want.
Give the people what they want. No. Let's give them what they absolutely don't want. Yeah.
Well, those were the main questions we had for you. And normally we would ask you questions that we ask every guest. But before we do that, I want to know if anyone in the audience had a question for RJ.
Yeah, what you have to do is you have to tell them if somebody doesn't ask a question, you'll come out and start asking them questions. And usually somebody will think of a question. Yeah. You just get out there and start asking, what's your favourite book?
RJ will ask you a question.
Yeah. What's your favourite book? And if it's not one of mine, I'll sulk. And that's a terrible thing to say. I'm not going to do it. Oh, no, see, ultimately.
So, has there been a moment while you were writing any of your books where you've just had to yes, this is
Yes.
That sticks with you.
Yeah, it's really rare because at some point writing Gods of the Wyrdwood, I emailed my editor and said, this is the worst book I've ever read. No one's going to read this book. It's terrible. And she emailed me back and said, RJ, you have said that about every book you have written. So that's kind of my state when I'm writing. I always say I feel like there's a really, really good writer just over the horizon who I am chasing. And that's how I feel when I'm writing. I feel that this should be so much better than it is, and I'm not there. And my agent always says, no, you're really good. You're really good. And I was going, no, never say that. Because I always want to be chasing that. Because otherwise, the minute you start, I'm happy with this, I think you're kind of dead.
And you don't feel that, like, even though you have that feeling of like kind of imposter syndrome, I'm not good enough, this isn't working. Has that become something you expect now? So you're kind of, you look forward to it, but you know it's coming? No,
it always surprises me. I always think when I start this book, it'll be great. And then I get halfway through it and think, no, it's awful. But when I wrote The Bone Ships, there's a 3-ship on 3-ship battle towards the end. And when I was editing back the first draft, I found that I was holding my breath when I read it. And I just thought, I fucking nailed that. Yes! and also, as well as the stuff that you write and you know it's right, and it's a really odd sense. It might not be right, it might need a tweak, but you know it's right, because there's a sequence of where they load, they don't have cannons, they have massive sort of crossbows on their ships, in the Bone Ships. And there's like a 2-page sequence where they load one of these. And my editor went, this is a lot of loading a thing. And I wrote back and went, Jenny, it's not a naval book if you don't have at least 2 pages of how to work a cannon. It just isn't, and I'm not prepared to back down on this. And it's just, well, okay, your funeral.
Any other questions? Yeah, Shauna.
How clean would your first drafts be? Do you have to do a lot of editing, or is it quite neat?
Depends what you mean by clean. If you mean plot-wise, they don't generally change a lot, which always kind of surprises me the way I write, in that I'm making it up as I go along, but they tend to be quite similar. Though Wyrdwood is different because I wrote Wyrdwood in first person, and Jenny wrote to me and said, we like this book, we'll print it as it is. Are you absolutely sure it should be in first person? And because I'm a writer, I just thought, of course, I'm absolutely sure. I wouldn't have done it on the course, I'm absolutely sure. And then woke up the next morning and went, no, it should be third person. I've made a terrible mistake. And that's the biggest changes I've ever done to a book. But the actual plot didn't change.
So did you rewrite the entire book to take it from first to third person?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And it's massive as well. It's the biggest book I've ever written. Yeah. I think I was so cross with it all the way through. I was cross with that idiot who wrote it in first person. And what was he thinking? What a fool. But grammar-wise, that questions from Sean Lawrence, we share an agent. Maybe not as clean. I get a lot of email from Ed, our agent, pointing out the things that I do. That I cannot spell the word from. I write form every single time, and I cannot pick it up in a document. And I just get emails back from my agent that just goes form. Like, shut up, Ed. Leave me alone. So grammar-wise, it's interesting. But plot-wise, it's usually quite accurate as to what it's going to be. I think that's why I managed to be, I'm doing air quotes for fast. And that's because it is what it's going to be generally. But that feels like terrible hubris. And I've not got the edits back on my second Wyrdwood book yet. So it might not always be the case. Probably won't. Going to come back and go, no, rewrite this entire thing.
Any other questions?
I think me and Tariq would quite like to have some recommendations for American crime, because
absolutely.
You've tantalised us with that a few times, and so I mean, off the top of my head, I might be kind of Don Winslow. There's a guy writing at the moment called Jordan Harper. I love his stuff. Yeah. Going back a bit, is Charlie Houston. Can you recommend any great American crime?
I would say do the Robert B. Parker books, the Spencer books.
Yeah, classics.
Yeah, they're fantastic. Every book is exactly the same, but I love them. If you've not read Robert Crace, Robert Crace's Elvis Cole and Joe Pike books, one of the things that I really like in a book it's why I love the Aubrey Maturin Master and Commander books, because it's about friendship. Robert Crace's Elvis Cohen Joe Pike books are astounding, and then there's a book called LA Requiem, which changed the way I think about writing. And he writes it from 3 points of view that are all going to come into conflict at the end. And as the book progresses, the points of view get shorter, and it's just so clever. And the other one is James Lee Burke, who just writes the most beautiful. He writes about a man who is by nature violent and doesn't want to be. And each of his books is like a gathering storm, and they exist in the deep south of America. And my favourite thing about him is there's a very gentle, supernatural thread that runs through. Some books there's nothing, and then every so often something will come up. And then his most recent book, called A Private Cathedral, he's clearly just gone, fuck it. I'm all in. And his two heroes are pursued by 1,000-year-old hitman from hell. And the end of it takes place on the River Styx. Nothing like this in any of the other books. And weirdly, absolutely, you never think of it as strange. It's just like, yeah, that happens in Louisiana. That's just what it's like. I'm going to accept that.
And we did have one question that someone wanted us to ask, which was, what is your favourite dinosaur?
This has come from Kit Power, hasn't it? Has this come from Kit Power?
No, it hasn't.
There's only one good dinosaur. And I think everybody in this room already knows that. Tenda, you know what this is. You know the answer to this. Sat over there, it is the Triceratops. Everybody knows this. There isn't as cool a dinosaur as the Triceratops. It's obvious.
Why is it the Triceratops?
Because it is. You just need to accept it.
That makes sense.
Don't start down the T-Rex path, because it leads nowhere good.
Well, Tarek, do you want to do your either or?
Yeah, I'm going to go with my... should we do the whole thing?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's begin with quick fire, either or. No right answer here apart from one of them, perhaps, at the end. But we'll start off with crime or fantasy fiction.
To read or write?
Right.
Right. Fantasy. It's much more freeing. You can do anything.
But to read?
Probably crime.
Okay.
Because I like a mystery.
Yeah.
And on the subject of that, just if you have not watched Poker Face, astounding
I
television.
think it just came in the UK last Sunday, I think. So that's my next show to watch. Yeah.
It's just brilliant.
Nice.
Just. But there's an episode of Two Old Ladies, and it's one of the greatest things I've ever seen on television.
TV or cinema?
TV, because I'm really lazy, and I don't want to leave the house, basically. And I also resent how much you have to pay for popcorn.
Night owl or early bird?
Can I be neither? I'm like good between about...
I'm afraid you have to pick one.
Probably a night owl then. I'm not a morning person. My son has just got old enough that I don't have to walk with him to school anymore. Yeah. And it's possibly the most freeing thing I've ever had in my life. The only bad thing is that my wife uses our bedroom as an office. So at 9 o'clock, she's like, you really have to get out of bed. I'm doing a meeting on Zoom. You cannot be in bed. Okay. So yeah, a night owl.
Star Wars or Star Trek?
You see, I've changed over the years. I have really enjoyed the last series of Picard and Star Trek Discovery and Strange New Worlds. I've really enjoyed those. And I've started to find a lot of Star Wars quite tiresome. But Andor has Star Wars for me, just because I thought it was a brilliant...
Andor was a great example of what you're saying, is dropping someone in it and just you learn the lingo and how things work as you go.
Yeah, and at no point does it sort of look at you and wink over its glasses and go, Star Wars. Hey. And actually, I'm rewatching Star Wars Rebels with my son. Okay. And that is also brilliant. Yeah. That's just top class storytelling in Star Wars Rebels.
Yeah. And the last one, real book or ebook?
Real book, by a long way.
Okay, so I'm pretty much the only person.
We ask this question on every podcast. Tarek wants everyone to say ebook, and about 3 people have said it.
What was it, 4?
Yeah.
I think if you'd asked me 3 or 4 years ago, I'd have said ebook.
Okay.
And my wife would definitely say ebook.
We should get her on the podcast.
Yeah, you should. Yeah, yeah.
I need all the help I can get.
Yeah.
What about if we go to the audience? I want to see hands up for ebooks over audiobooks.
Audio, real.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Hands up for
Oh.
ebooks over real books. That's about 50 people.
No.
Yeah.
See what you're doing
Everyone
there.
listening at home.
Yeah.
I like ebooks for ease, and it's a really odd thing. The only reason I don't like ebooks, and I think this might bring me down on your side, Tariq. I've got to be honest.
Okay, here we go.
Is at one point I started sending my third or fourth draft to my Kindle to read on my Kindle. Yeah. So reading on an ebook would immediately put my head into that. Right, I'm reading this critically to edit it, and I just found anything else impossible to read on it, because instead of thinking, I'm enjoying this book, I was thinking, what would I do with this?
Okay.
Where would I go with it? And my mind will not switch off, so I've had to go back to normal books.
Okay.
But actually, I did just read the entirety of Joe R. Lansdale's Hap and Leonard books on ebook. So he gets a pass.
Stop trying to
So that's ebook then, I think.
Yeah. I'm a terrible fence sitter. Yeah.
Well, that's all the questions that we had for you today, RJ. But thanks very much for joining us.
I've had a lovely time. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'll come back whenever.
Great. And thanks everyone for coming.
Well done. We love the audience.
Well, thanks very much to RJ for coming on to the podcast. We really enjoyed doing that, especially in front of an audience, which isn't something that we get to do an awful lot. And I know that Tarek enjoyed it as much as I did as well. So if you were one of the ones to come along and watch it live, thanks very much. We certainly hope to be able to do that again in the future. You can buy Gods of the Wyrdwood now. We've put a link in the podcast description, and who knows, we'll maybe get RJ back on the podcast one day because he was such great fun. Next week we have a guest that was actually in the audience for that talk. We are speaking with the brilliant C.K. McDonnell, or Queeve McDonnell. He is the author of the Dublin Trilogy series of books, and I say that because although it's called the Dublin Trilogy, it spans many more than just 3 books. He's a former stand-up comedian, now writes full-time. He's works in both the self-publishing and trad publishing spheres. So it's a really interesting and fun interview again. So please do tune in for that one. If you enjoyed today's episode, please do take time to give us a rating and review on your favourite podcast app, as that helps us to continue to get great guests. And as Tarek would always say, if you want to get in touch, you can get in touch with us at podcast@rightgear.co.uk or contact us on a variety of social media, where our handle is at UK Page 1 on most of the services. We're writing.exchange / Page 1 Pod on Mastodon as well. But otherwise, have a great week, and we'll speak to you next episode. Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode. If you did, please leave a comment down below, hit that thumbs up button, and be sure to hit that subscribe button as well, so you never miss an episode like these ones below.
And if you want to get in touch, you can always drop us a tweet in the Twitter machine, which is at UK Page 1, as evidenced here, and our other social media channels are available.
Otherwise, we hope to see you next episode.
See you later.